Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. I commend your choice of a non-technical talk while there is so much very interesting technical content out there. So before we begin, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Valentin. I'm a solution architect at 47 Degrees. I'm also, and more importantly for today, a conference organizer. I'm a member of the crew organizing the Scala.io conference for the last 3 years. I'm also the current leader of the Paris Scala user group, which is one of the oldest Scala user group in the world. We're about to celebrate our 100th meetup later this year. And I've been also speaking at conferences for the last 4 years. So I say that to convince you that I know one thing or two about speaking at conferences, but I'm not a professional speaker. And I also know a bunch of things about organizing conferences and meetup. And before we get any further, can we raise your hand if you've ever gave a talk at a conference or a meetup? Okay, cool. So maybe you're not the right audience for this talk, but anyway. The thing is, over the last a few years, I've kept wondering why there isn't more people wanting to become speakers. You might not be aware, but saying that there is never enough speakers might sound a little bit paradoxical, because there are plenty of conferences. All these conferences have a very big lineup filled with many, many interesting talks. So why am I complaining? Well, the thing you might not be aware of is that most of the time, conference organizers, they have a specific idea of the experience they want to provide to their attendees. And finding the right speakers for this experience might not be always easy. For example, last year at Scala.io, our call for paper got 200 and a little bit more proposals. And we, as the Scala.io conference, we strive to provide a good experience for beginners in the Scala community, because we think that this conference, which is the only conference about Scala in France, is a good way to grow the community. But last year, among the 200 and more proposals we had only 7 proposals targeting beginners. So because of that, we weren't able to provide the intended experience to our beginner users. And the problem is even bigger for meetup organizers, which by definition have a much, much smaller pool of prospective speakers. And as a meetup organizer, every month I have to search for speakers, and it's really tiresome and time-consuming. And most of the time, the crew organizing the meetup has to come up with a talk on short notice just to fill in a gap in the schedule. But this shortage of speakers also have an impact on what we call promoting diversity. For a conference point of view, promoting diversity is to come up with a lineup where underrepresented groups are more represented than they are in the industry. And to go back to the Scala.io example, last year we had only 5 proposals coming from women, which is less than 2%. But there are, even though it's not a fair proportion, there are 20% of women in tech right now, roughly. So it's 10 times less than the actual proportion, which is already not enough. So there is not much we can do as conference organizers if you, the community, do not step up and try to become speakers. So I've been keeping wondering why people don't want to become speakers, and I've kept talking about it with conference attendees and meetup attendees. And a few reasons came up. So I tried to verify these reasons with a very non-scientific Twitter poll that got a little less than 500 answers. And I will go through these reasons one by one. So the biggest reason is people think they have nothing interesting to say. It's like the majority of them. Then, in second position, which was quite a surprise for me, they are afraid of speaking in public, which is something that I understand. And also, a fair bunch of people think their level of English is not enough to get on stage and talk at conferences. And I do think that all these reasons are not good reasons, actually. So in the next part of the talk, I will try to debunk and disprove these reasons. So, yeah, I missed my slide. Anyway, so first reason, I have nothing interesting to say. So when someone tells me that, I hear three different things. First, they might not have any idea of a talk. So I have nothing to say. Second, they might have an idea, but think that it is not worth it presenting it at a conference. And finally, they might have an idea, find it interesting, but feel that they don't have the legitimacy to talk about these subjects. And I think the three are wrong. I'm pretty sure that in that room, 100% of the people have something interesting to share with the community. You probably have a new library you use at work that you're very enthusiastic about, or you had a recent dramatic failure in production that you might want to share about, and so on and so forth. But that's probably not the biggest reason. The biggest reason is people that think that they have something to say, but think that it is not interesting. And to them, I will answer that it is not yours to decide whether what you have to say is interesting or not. Conferences have a call for paper committee, and submitting a talk is precisely asking them, are you interested in what I have to say? And they might answer yes, and select your talk to a conference, or they might answer no. And this no doesn't mean that your idea isn't interesting. In fact, they most of the time won't have the time or energy to explain to you why they refuse your talk. But most of the time it's because they probably have already accepted another talk on the subject, or your subject doesn't fit the idea or the experience they want to provide. In any case, not knowing whether people will be interested in your talk or not is not a good reason to not ask them, right? And you can also talk about your idea with your friends or coworkers, and you will probably realize that your idea is interesting, right? So please, if you have an idea of talk, don't refrain yourself from submitting it to a conference. Next, and I was really surprised this didn't came up in the first position in the poll. Public speaking, give me the creeps. And, well, I agree with you. It is a very scary experience. Actually, I am currently sweating, and the last hour was a little bit uncomfortable. But as it turns out, the fear of public speaking, even though it's really irrational, I mean, nobody got harmed from speaking at a conference. Nobody got killed, right? It's really irrational, but it's something that we all share. And it's actually a good thing. A few months ago, I was at the offices of my new company, 47 Degrees, and I was freaking out because I was about to give a talk to an attendance of 10 people that I knew and I was a friend with. And a coworker who is also a musician who do live concerts told me that stage fright is in fact the proof that you respect your audience. And in that respect, it's something good, something you don't want to see disappearing. It's good for two reasons. If you fear of ridiculing yourself on stage by saying something not good, and you probably keep telling yourself, what if somebody asks me that question about that specific point I'm not really clear about? That fear will push you to clarify this point and to be ready for that question. And also, on a biological level, fear releases adrenaline in your brain, which is probably the best stimulant for it, and it's legal. And that adrenaline, yeah, it is. And that adrenaline will keep your brain focused and will make you more aware of your audience reaction. And that will in turn help you make the whole experience more engaging. So you probably don't want fear to disappear. But still, it's really not a very pleasant sensation. So in order to help you manage that, and even though it's really, really personal, what I'm about to show you, I want to show you how my fear works so that maybe you will deal with yours a little bit more easily. So let's look, everybody can read the graph. So here is a little diagram with a scale that is completely nonsense. And it is basically my heart rate, depending on time, in respect to a given talk. So first, I propose the talk to a call for paper, and there is no fear whatsoever. And then the proposal gets accepted. And I have the big spike of fear and anxiety because of that. A very personal anecdote. I think my memory works in a very strange way. I have very few memories that are vivid, that I can summon at will to revive them. But I can assure you that the first time I got a talk accepted at a conference is one of these memories. I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing, and how, by just reading the few first lines of that email, my heart rate raised up to 150 beats per minute. All my body covered in sweat. I had to get up, get out on shaky legs, chain smoke a few cigarettes, call my mom, and so on. I was very happy, but at the same point, I was completely freaking out. And it still does the same for every talk. Then, something that is maybe a little bit more surprising, I do have these spikes of anxiety by just thinking about the talk before even working on it. And of course, it works when the brain isn't too busy, so most of the time it happens when I am laying in bed just before sleeping, and so I have a few difficult nights before even working on the talk. Then it gets better as long as I work on the talk, and of course then there is the big spike that probably is the same for everybody. But what I want you to notice is that the spikes start just a few hours, sometimes a few days before the talk. But as soon as I said the first few words, it starts to get better. I still have adrenaline, but I don't have the fear or anxiety. So that's it. Your mileage might probably vary, and I know by talking with Dominic that, for example, it's not the same for him. But I wanted to share that with you to show you that it's something very common, and that's something you can overcome. And I also have a few good news. Well, first, the amount of fear and anxiety isn't related to the amount of people that will be there on the talk. I have the same amount of anxiety regardless of speaking in front of 10 people or 500. Then, rehearsing the talk a lot, and when I mean a lot, it's a lot, it will help a lot in turn, because you will master your content, you will get more confident, and it will become an habit, and it will make everything easier. And for your first talk, another technique you can use is just grab a co-speaker. Speaking with someone else helps a lot because both will care about the other and they will encourage the other, and by not being alone on stage, you will probably have much less anxiety. As I said already, the fear vanishes once you get on stage and you start to speak. And also, even though it never disappears, and I think even professional speakers still have stage fright, it gets much, much better after 1 or 2 talks. So this is not a very pleasant feeling, but you can work on it. And in fact, if you go down the path of becoming a speaker, you will have to find your own recipe against this anxiety. So mine is probably the nerdiest one. I keep reciting in my head the litany against fear from the Dune novels. Maybe you know that. Who would have thought that reading science fiction book could have a useful use in real life, right? But it can be anything. It can be a relaxation technique. It can be positive thoughts. It can be, I don't know, making a joke or listening to some kind of music. It will be your recipe. And this recipe, you will be able to use it in many, many other situations in life that provoke this kind of fear of anxiety. Like, I don't know, proposing to your significant other, or something not as much pleasant as that, like getting on trial, or I don't know, pitching an idea of a startup or whatever. So just for that, you should try and find your own recipe and fight your own anxiety. And finally, the last reason that came out of that poll was I don't speak English well enough. Well, you might have noticed by now that English is not my first language. And even this is a proof. I'm searching for my words. But even though it's not my first language, you understand what I'm saying, right? So probably your level of English is enough to speak at a conference too. And in fact, there are plenty of ways you can overcome that. You can ask for help. You can search in a dictionary for the words that are not the most natural to you. You can even go further, and even though it's not in general a good advice, you can learn the text of your talk by heart and just recite it on stage. It's not something you should do for every talk because it will probably prevent the experience to be very engaging, but it's something you can do. And then you will probably say, okay, I can learn my text by heart, but what if somebody asks me a question? What if I don't even understand the question? And my answer would be that a conference talk isn't a conversation. You're allowed to not take questions at the end of the talk. If you're really not comfortable with that, it's okay. You can even tell the organizers, look, I'm okay for the talk, I'm ready, but I will not be comfortable taking questions, and they will probably make sure that nobody asks questions. And even if you take questions but don't understand what the question was, you're allowed to say, I don't understand, or make the attendee repeat his question. And moreover, and this is not related to your level in English, but if somebody asks you a question and you cannot understand, you cannot answer it, you are also allowed to say, I don't know. Because a conference talk isn't a conversation, but it isn't a lecture either. You're not there to teach, you're there to share with the people, to share with the community. So that again shouldn't prevent you from giving a talk. And finally, if you recall the Twitter poll, there was a 9% of other answers. And one of the most important one was, it is too much work to give a talk. And this one actually isn't a fallacy. It's indeed a lot of work to give a talk. For example, this one, which isn't technical, took me roughly 40 hours to prepare. And some took me much, much more. But you should see that as an investment. For a technical talk, all the work you will put in will help you learn about the subject you want to talk about. For example, last year I gave a talk about recursion schemes. And that talk featured a diagram explaining how hylomorphisms work. That diagram took me roughly 8 hours to build, mostly because I'm not really good at keynotes, but still. But by doing that diagram, I realized that I hadn't completely understood how hylomorphisms work. So I learned about my subject by preparing a talk about it. And there are plenty of other very cool outcomes of giving a talk and preparing a talk. Of course, there is this visibility and reputation outcome, but that's not guaranteed. And I shouldn't lie to you and say, give a talk, you will become famous and everybody will throw money at you and so on. That probably will not happen. But that's, yeah, I mean, I'm giving talk for the last 4 years and nobody threw any money at me, so. But you can, if you want. I'm open to that, no problem. But also, there are many cool outcomes to that, regardless of the money problem. You will share with the community, meaning that you will probably help people. And that's, in itself, is a very, very interesting outcome. We'll get to that a little bit later. So, hopefully, by now, I should have convinced you that most of the reasons preventing you for becoming a speaker are not good ones. And if so, now I want to talk a little bit more about what it is to give a talk. So, giving a talk at a conference is pretty much always the same process. You have to come up with an idea. You have to sell this idea to a conference. Then, once it's sold, you have to prepare what's the product. And finally, you have to, you will gather profit from that. So let's look at these steps one by one. So how do you come up with an idea for a talk? And in fact, there are many ways to come up with good ideas. First, you can talk about everything you're passionate about, like a new library, a new technique, a new programming language. Not necessarily something that's new, something that's maybe you've already seen a bunch of talks about it, like functors or monads, but that's not a problem. Because even though there have been many talks about it, your talk might be the one that will make someone else understand the concept. So do not prevent yourself of talking about something even though you've already seen talks about that subject. You can also talk about the thing that makes you upset. That's pretty much what I'm doing right now. I'm upset because there are not enough speakers. So I am giving a talk about something that makes me upset. But in that case, you should try to be cautious and keep a positive message, because you wouldn't probably enjoy me ranting for 15 minutes about my difficulties in filling up the lineup of my meetup, for example. So you can talk about something that makes you upset, but try to find a positive angle. You also can talk about war stories of things that failed spectacularly and how you overcame it. Because again, you should try to be positive. You could also try to build a talk you wished you had seen a few months or years before. Say you struggled understanding free monads or shapeless in Scala. Finally, that clicked in your mind. And even though you have seen many talks about shapeless, for example, that's a very good example because talk about shapeless, most of the time, that don't really help understanding shapeless, at least in my case. And so you can also talk about, build the talk that you wish you had seen a few years before. And there are plenty of ways to come up with ideas of talks. I have a very shameful confession to make. Even though I wanted to talk about that subject, and I was bothered by that subject, what pushed me into building this talk was the slide I almost missed. What is this one? Because sometimes you just want to make a stupid pun or display a cute picture of a cat. That's a very good, that's a perfectly legitimate reason to try to build a talk. As long as you fill the content. We'll get to that later too. So there are plenty of ideas of talk that are lying around, and you should just pick them and go ahead. Next, to make it happen, you have to sell the product to a conference. And there are a few techniques for that. Now I will put my conference organizer hat and tell you what I want to see in a proposal in order to select a talk. And so I call that the why, what, and how. And they are in order of importance. Actually, the real importance is the why. I need to know why you're enthusiastic about your subject, why you think it is important to talk about that subject, why that makes you upset, why, etc., etc. What is the problem you want to solve? Then, of course, you should at least sketch what is your solution, what's the answer you're giving to that question, and maybe if you have the space for it, a little bit about how you intend to build the talk, the structure of it. But really what's important is why you want to talk about it, what makes it important to you. It's more important to me because it will help me as a call for paper committee member. It will help me distinguish your talk from others on the same subject. Right? If I feel your passion on this why, I will probably select you more easily than anyone else talking about the same subject. So this is really important, and that's something we quite rarely see in conference proposals. You should also ask for help, like ask people to proofread your proposals. And there is also on the functional programming Slack channel, Slack workspace, a CFP workshop channel, which is run by a very nice guy called Steven Sirek. He has a 100% success rate, meaning that everybody he helped writing proposals got accepted. And I think we have a few witnesses of that in that room, right? I am, and Dominic is too. And it's very good. He's a very good advice. And actually, and that's something. If there are conference organizers in the room, that's something that I really encourage you to do. We did last year at Scala.io, and we will probably do it again. Is a workshop about writing a proposal. And again, ask help to the community. I mean, you are doing that for the community, and the community can help you in that. And of course, in order to get accepted, you should submit everywhere. I mean, submitting a proposal is free. And you can reuse the same proposal for many call for papers. You can adapt it a little bit, depending on the audience of the conference. But submitting is free, so go and submit everywhere. So that's cool. You find a nice idea, you nailed a very good proposal, and you got accepted. Congratulations. Now it's time to prepare the talk. That's also probably something a little bit surprising, but you should definitely wait until getting accepted before you prepare the talk. Well, unless in some conferences the call for paper notification come out a few weeks before the conference, and so if you have not prepared your talk before that, you might have a bad time. But that's really, really rare, and most of the time you have a few months before the conference. So you wait to be accepted, and you start to prepare the conference. And again, this is how I work, and probably this is terrible advice, but even though you should focus on the structure of your talk, you also should keep aesthetics of your slides in mind. That's not the biggest advice of this presentation, because, I mean, there are many very excellent talks that have absolutely no aesthetics whatsoever in the slides, because, of course, finally, because in fact, the slides are not important, right? I mean, if the slides are more important than what you say, why are you getting on stage? Just write a blog post. But still, it will help people have a good experience if your slides are nice. And if you manage the aesthetics afterwards, you will probably have a bad time, because changing fonts and colors and stuff like that on 100 slides is much more difficult than doing that on the first slide. And also, having 100 slides is not a good idea whatsoever. So try to keep your slide number at a minimum. That's an important advice. Again, in building your talk, you should ask for help. I really mean it. If you get into that path and try to become a speaker and get accepted and so on, if you need help, I'll be there. I might not be of the best advice, but I will be very happy to help you. And you can also ask people to proofread your slides around you, coworkers, friends, and so on. And finally, and that's the biggest advice, rehearse, 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 rehearse again, and then rehearse once or twice. You can do rehearsals by yourself, as long as you do them out loud. It's really important, because the words will never come out of your mouth as they run in your head. So rehearse for real. When you rehearse alone, it's sort of a schizophrenic experience, because really, if you want to do it correctly, it's really a split brain experience, because you will be talking and trying to listen to yourself at the same time. Because the point of rehearsing is to spot the moment when your talk isn't really clear, when the flow isn't going right, and so on. So talking and listening to oneself at the same time can be difficult, and if you are not able to do that, you can record yourself. You record yourself and you watch the video. It's more tedious, but it works. But of course, the best is to rehearse to a real audience. An audience of 1 or 2, it's okay, but it's really, really important. And to also, it's also important to have an audience that is nice to you, but right? You need them to spot the point where the things aren't right. So find yourself a bunch of friends that are real friends, and we will not hesitate to tell you this is shit and this is good, but you should try mixing that the other way around. So that's it. You've came up with a good idea, you got selected, you're prepared. Now you're giving a talk. There is nothing else I can do for you, but afterwards you will profit. First, the big perk of being a conference speaker is that you will get a free dinner. Oh, I'm kidding. It's good, but you shouldn't become a speaker just for the speaker dinner. But the speaker dinner is probably a way to connect with people you admire, like other speakers, big names. It's a really, really good perk. Also, in general, going to conferences, but also speaking at conferences will help you make friends. New friends that you will maybe meet again at other conferences, and it will become an habit. And going to a conference will become an event where you're just going to meet with old friends. And that's really cool. I now have friends in Poland, the US, Japan, Israel, everywhere in the world that I would have never met if I didn't become a speaker. You will make yourself and people around you proud. And I really mean it. I mean, I'm divorced, but my ex-wife keeps bragging about me speaking at conference to her new boyfriend. I swear it's true. And I asked her authorization to tell you that. And she was okay. But I don't mean you should get a divorce. Right? And finally, and it's really serious this time, and it's the most important one, you will help people. And maybe sometime, somebody will come at you and tell you, oh, you're the guy I saw in video about that subject, and thanks to you, I finally understood that. And I swear this is one of the best feelings in life. It happens to me once, but it was worth it. So that's it. That was what I wanted to tell you today. And also, it's pretty much on purpose. Don't fear to not filling your slot of time, because nobody minds getting out earlier to get a coffee. That's pretty much what I'm about to do right now, because this is my last slide. And so now I think you have no excuses, and so I expect you to submit a proposal to the Scala.io call for paper, which is this fall in Lyon, France. Thank you. And we have plenty of time for questions. Yes?
Do you know like the kinds of tools people will use to like create these kind of presentations and whatnot?
I tend to use a different tool for every presentation because all these tools are not perfect. So this one was created on Google Slides, but sometimes I use Keynote. I use also stuff based on Markdown, like Reveal.js and so on. It really depends on what you want to present and what you're comfortable with. Yeah.
Have you ever been to Toastmasters?
No. What is that?
I'm really surprised. I think you should go. They would love to have you at Toastmasters. It's a public speaking group and it's worldwide.
Okay.
And I highly recommend Googling for the local Toastmaster group near you and you get practice at public speaking.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I will. Thanks. Yep.
Would you say it's like different for meetups than conferences? Do you think maybe it's a little more informal?
So yeah, that's precisely something I forgot to tell. But if fear and anxiety is too big for you, start with a meetup. A meetup you're accustomed to go and where you know people, because even though you will feel anxiety in any setup, talking to people you know is much easier. And also, people will be a a little bit more flexible and welcoming and forgiving if you have a hard time or if you stumble upon words and so on. So the experience is almost the same, but when you're a beginner, it's easier at meetups. But it's the same amount of work to prepare a talk and so on and so forth. Yeah?
What about the reverse situation? When you really want to talk on a conference, but you don't have any ideas, and would you pick someone else's idea?
Yeah.
I know about
there is no, I mean, there is no shortage of ideas. I think if you, I never met someone who was really wanting to talk for the sake of public speaking, because that's scary. But you know, all perversions are out there. So, but no, coming up with ideas is always come first. And actually, there are really plenty of sorts of ideas out there. I may not say that, but I built an old talk just for the sake of putting Game of Thrones puns in it. Turned out quite well, but don't follow my example. Any other questions? No? Oh, thank you.